Hi everyone, we have to talk about Vesuvius again today, and I had concerns quite a while ago already, and I have mentioned it in a video. I have even made a video about, is there a connection between Campi Flegrei and Vesuvius? I mean, we know the city of Naples with over 3 million people and the greater area that's around Campi Flegrei and Vesuvius, we're talking about over 6 million people. Are they connected? Is the rumbling of Campi Flegrei, this active Bradyseism that's happening there with earthquakes all the time, larger earthquakes, is that affecting Vesuvius? Or could Vesuvius with earthquakes trigger Campi Flegrei and vice versa? So scientists have not a total agreement on this, but they're kind of thinking that Campi Flegrei with its rumbling would not trigger Vesuvius. Maybe a Vesuvius eruption could trigger Campi Flegrei, maybe not. They really don't know. But what we know now, or what we're seeing now, it seems some scientists are reversing their opinion or are increasingly getting concerned about what is going on with Vesuvius, because Vesuvius is increasing its activity. And in this video, we will look at the latest INGV, that's the Institute of Italian Volcanology and Geology, what they have said about what's happening at Vesuvius. And there are some things that are increasing. And remember, this is happening at the same time while we're dealing with this Bradyseismic crisis at Campi Flegrei that is kind of like has escalated during this year and has raised more and more concerns about the potential for a volcanic eruption in this area. So we will look at the data that we have from Vesuvius and also into some theories what might cause this. Is this connected? Because let's start to look at the recent earthquakes, but we can look at this for the last few weeks and months. I always said I think Campi Flegrei and Vesuvius are playing ball with each other. So earthquakes form at Campi Flegrei, then a few earthquakes at Vesuvius, then the earthquakes form at Campi Flegrei again, then Vesuvius. You can really put your clock after this. It's really happening quite like as a pattern. So is this related? Because really look at these earthquakes and we're just dealing with another earthquake swarm again. So right now we had a magnitude 1.7 at Campi Flegrei just today, November 11th, but before that, November 9th, 3 Vesuvius earthquakes, 2.8. I haven't seen it do that in the last few weeks that high. So usually it was like 1 point something in the lower ranges. And remember, what you see in this earthquake list are only the earthquakes above magnitude 1. So there's more earthquakes, but they're below magnitude 1. But we look at those ones. And then, you know, November 9th, we had an earthquake swarm at Campi Flegrei that basically started on November 6th. But then before that, Vesuvius again. So the new bulletin and the data that we'll see will give us a broader picture about this. And you know, we know how controlled the Campi Flegrei area is because it is a dangerous super volcano that has produced super dangerous, devastating eruptions in the past, and so has Vesuvius. I mean, we all remember what happened to Pompeii, but Campi Flegrei is definitely the more dangerous guy here compared to Vesuvius, but Vesuvius is already dangerous enough. So we don't want to deal with a potential Campi Flegrei eruption and a Vesuvius eruption. So what is going on? So that's why the INGV and the institute that is responsible for monitoring Vesuvius and Campi Flegrei, it's also called the INGV Vesuvius Observatory. So they're monitoring the Campania region. And it's so important. And to understand what is going on between these two dangerous volcanoes and the millions and millions of people that live around them, and in case of Campi Flegrei, right on top of them, because people were not aware that this even is a volcano because it spreads 100 kilometers even into the water. It's not like a stratovolcano like Vesuvius that really dominates the landscape where it's pretty obvious something's going on there. But even there, they have settled along the lower slopes of Vesuvius. Vesuvius, government has tried to make people move away with monetary incentives. There were not many takers. This area is quite unique in the world because it's really greatly monitored. And this Vesuvius Observatory, I want to give you a quick overview of what they're doing so that you understand the data that I'm going to show you, the graphs, that you have a little bit of a better overview. So the Vesuvius Observatory was founded in 1841 by King Ferdinand II of Bourbon. And because of that, the Vesuvius Observatory is the oldest volcanological observatory in the world. So since 2001, it is the section of the Naples National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology. It's one of the main operational structures that gives the Italian Department of Civil Protection scientific and technical support, and especially in particular, the work of the Vesuvius Observatory focuses on the volcanoes of the Naples area. That's Ischia, Vesuvius, Campi Flegrei, and Stromboli. So they're carrying out scientific research for these volcanoes, surveillance and 24/7 supervision, but also they're doing teaching and dissemination. And these volcanoes are high risk volcanoes, and they have shown that they can produce explosive, dangerous eruptions, and now they are in proximity to one of the most densely populated areas in Italy or even Europe, large urban areas, Naples, and Naples is basically squeezed in between these two potential monsters. So what the Vesuvius Observatory does, the aim of the Vesuvius Observatory is to allow the scientists a short-term forecasting more accurately and timely. And that is important because the people live right there. There is not much time in an event should these volcanoes act up. And you know, they also come with these earthquakes and higher earthquakes that are already dangerous enough. So the surveillance system that they're using has been adapted over the years to the increased knowledge that scientists have about volcanic and tectonic knowledge. So the surveillance system, and I'll show you this map here where you can see where all these surveillance stations are located around Vesuvius and what different kinds they are. So this surveillance system of Vesuvius and the Vesuvius Observatory, I'm showing you Vesuvius right now. That's what we want to focus in this video, but I've shown you in past videos about Campi Flegrei. So that's geophysical and geochemical networks that are all over the place. And so the first ones, the geophysical ones, monitor the seismic activity, the ground deformation, and gravimetric and magnetic field variations. And the geochemical networks, they control the changes in the composition and the temperature of the gases that are emitted from fumaroles in this area. But they also look at soil from the groundwater. So it's an overall surveillance system that goes at these volcanoes from different angles. And if you look at that map here and the legend that tells you where these stations are, how do they control the seismic activity? So the Vesuvius Observatory carries out the control of these seismic volcanic areas through their network of seismic stations that they have. They are active in the Vesuvius area, in the Ischia area, and of course the Campi Flegrei area. And the network consists of a number of permanent fixed seismic stations. They're distributed on the surface, on the ground, and in part to even the surrounding areas of these volcanoes. And should there be an event of increased seismic activity, this network will then also, or it is enhanced with the addition of mobile seismic stations that they can place in areas where there might be clusters. So in each stations, there are some sensors that detect the motion of the soil, and they're transferring real-time data that are collected by the Center for Surveillance, where these data are received, they're analyzed, and they're interpreted so that the Vesuvius Observatory has a full picture of what is going on. But in addition to this, we know this if you follow my channel, in order to know, is a volcano acting up? We're looking at fumarole's temperature, we're looking at the earthquakes, but we're also looking at the ground deformation. Is the land rising? It is rising at Campi Flegrei. At what rate is it rising? And then usually shortly before an eruption, it gets quiet. It stops rising because it has reached the point of maximum elasticity. And that's when we could see an eruption. That's what's happening in Iceland right now, if you follow my channel, on a monthly or bi-monthly basis right now. It's important that they control these ground deformations. So the Bradyseism that is going on right now. So they do control of this ground deformation for the 3 active volcanoes in the Campania through these networks, and it's called precision leveling and tide gogs. So they have vertical measuring points where they measure the water levels. We know that the port of Pozzuoli, for example, because of that Bradyseism, the land was rising. Now they have less water there. It's more shallow, which is not good for a port. So on the edges of the port where the seawall is, there's grass growing right now. And we will get more into this. And then they're controlling the gravimetric field. So they're measuring the acceleration of gravity. And that allows the Vesuvius Observatory to evaluate any changes that are happening in the gravimetric field that would be indicative of shifts in the magnetic masses in the surface. They want to know what's going on with the magma and the hydrothermal system, what's going on underneath? Is there something changing? And then there's the geochemical control. So the networks control the geochemical composition of these fumaroles. We've all seen the pictures of the fumaroles that are releasing hot volcanic gases, sulfuric acid gases, in the Solfatara crater of Campi Flegrei. So they want to know what's in these gases. Is something changes? They're looking at the fumaroles, the gases that are coming out from the soil and from water sources. So why are they doing it? The purpose of these measurements is to highlight the changes over time of these chemical species that essentially are freed from the magma body that is underneath. So since their origin is this magma body, there are significant parameters to determine what's going on underneath. So changes in these systems can give us an insight whether this volcano is resuming its activity or increasing its activity. And they're also controlling the water temperatures in the areas of Campi Flegrei and Vesuvius. So if you look at that map, you see the yellow circles with the green line. That's these permanent seismic stations, and we have the standalone seismic stations, and then the star, the yellow star by Torre del Greco, that's where they measure the water levels. And then there's more like leveling networks. These are these red lines with all these red dots, these leveling benchmarks. What they want to do here is they want to see, you see where the volcano is located. There we have the most measuring stations, and the crater of Vesuvius, that's this pink star. That is basically where they monitor the fumaroles. But then you see it stretches out very far. So what they want to know with these stations is there something going on? Is Vesuvius causing a land rise in this area or a land subsidence? So they need to know what's going on around Vesuvius. Is there magma rising up, what's happening there. So that is very, very important. And if you look at these stations, I mean, we know there is this Bradyseism going on at Campi Flegrei right now. The land is rising, and it's rising, has risen pretty significantly in 2024 already. And if you've seen my last Iceland video, one of my last videos, it was rumbling all over the Reykjanes Peninsula and in other areas of Iceland all of a sudden. And so people were wondering, where is this coming from? So we know the land where the magma chamber is located that has caused all these eruptions, basically that started a year ago. Yeah, it's anniversary, a year ago. That magma chamber is causing a land rise again. So they were wondering, the land rise underneath Fort Sangi, could that be responsible for the other earthquakes? Could that land rise spread the tension in the crust further out to other areas? We've seen earthquakes into the sea at Elde and in other areas. So they weren't sure, is this tectonic earthquakes because there's two tectonic plates moving away from each other, or is the land rise spreading pressure and putting pressure in other areas? And now it's the same question that scientists are asking right now. What's happening at Campi Flegrei? Is that land rise basically spreading out the tension? Is it spreading out the tension as far as the Vesuvius area? Could that be the reason why we're seeing earthquakes at Vesuvius? Well, let's have a look at how the earthquakes and how the unrest at Vesuvius has developed over time, because that is I would say interesting, definitely, but at the same time also a little bit concerning. Here is another map where you can see more isolated the permanent seismic stations that are looking at Vesuvius. That's from the bulletin. The bulletin gives us an overview about Vesuvius seismic activity for the month of October, for the last month. But keep in mind, it's been happening in November as well. So if you look at that map here, you see all the earthquakes and you see where the summit of Vesuvius is, and there you have all the red dots and larger dots. So this is the center. This is basically the earthquakes right underneath Vesuvius, most of them at a depth of 3 kilometers. So could there be a magma chamber? We know the magma chamber of Campi Flegrei that has risen up, that's causing this right now, is at a shallow depth, way shallower than they thought. It's only 3.9 kilometers deep. So magma needs to travel less. And what we also know, the last Bradyseismic activity that really stood out in the 1980s didn't cause an eruption, but magma was on the move, did cause a magma intrusion, has damaged the caprock layer, the layer that keeps the lid on. You see this in the graphic that shows the 1984 happenings. So now, while we have another stronger, even stronger Bradyseism going on, the caprock layer that keeps the lid on this thing at Campi Flegrei has only a third of its strength left. So the soil, the rocks are getting more brittle. They're wearing out by these repeated, like land rise, land subsidence, land rising. It's putting pressure on this. So could this be the reason? You know, it's right underneath Vesuvius, most of the epicenters. So yeah, maybe some isolated earthquakes like the 2 green dots, could they be caused by Campi Flegrei, or is something rising underneath Vesuvius that is having most of the tension underneath the summit and then spreading it out? Then we would have 2 guys rising up and putting pressure on an area with more than 6 million people. So in the last few years, Vesuvius hasn't really been the center of attention of people, news, media, and scientists. Yeah, there have been some earthquakes, but it's kind of normal. It's not concerning, but Campi Flegrei, right? But what some scientists are saying that this trend could soon change. So Vesuvius could very, very soon, or is already starting to also becoming the center of attention. I'm not saying the attention is going away from Campi Flegrei, but Vesuvius is also getting increased attention because, again, look at this earthquake map that the INGV, the Vesuvius Observatory, has released. You can really see that there have been several earthquakes every day in the recent weeks. And look at this red bar chart here that you see. That basically starts a year ago, November 1st, until the end of October. And remember, we've already had quite a rumbling going on in November with the 2.8 that I just showed you. So what is kind of, I don't want to say alarming, but to me it is alarming, but at least catches your eye if you look at that bar chart. If you draw a curve, it's going up, isn't it? And then this graph only shows us the October, and then, you know, around October 13th, that really stands out too, how high, what has happened there. So the number of events, the number of earthquakes are increasing. The earthquakes at Campi Flegrei are increasing. So is there a connection? Many people are saying, do they share a magma chamber? Do they not share a magma chamber? So opinions vary. The more common opinion is they do not really share the magma chamber, maybe a deeper lying magma reservoir, but not the shallow magma chamber. They each have their own shallow magma chamber. But this can change in a day. We've seen this in Iceland underneath Trotsengi. Is it sharing something with Fagradalsfjall? Yes or no? First it was no, now it's maybe yes. They don't know. They can't do X-rays and exactly see, oh, this magma chamber's here, it's that big, it has that much in it. It's hard. Science is not that far progressed, unfortunately. So in the recent weeks, we've had quite a high number of earthquakes every day. And they were not only concentrated right on Vesuvius, but also spread over a larger area, also in higher magnitudes. So on November 9th, for example, there was a small swarm of earthquakes that has began there. I just showed you. It has produced 20 quakes just in one day, and the strongest, that's that one that you see in the list here, was 2.8. That's quite significant. With volcanoes, that is something. It is definitely something. And the 2.8 happened at a shallow depth of only 0.9 kilometers, so just underneath a kilometer, and it was underneath the southwestern flank of Vesuvius. So southwestern towards Campi Flegrei. Has Campi Flegrei sent something? It's really, really hard to tell. But if we look at the monthly bulletin of the Vesuvius Observatory, just in the month of October, there were 186 earthquakes in the area of Vesuvius only in October. And that is the record high for the year 2024. So it is accelerating. And the year 2024 itself has already been characterized as a year with elevated earthquake activity, significantly higher earthquake activity at Vesuvius. So far, in 2024, there are 1,036 tremors that have been recorded. Already, year's not over yet. In the previous years, for the whole year, it was fewer than 700. So we could look at something maybe almost twice as many earthquakes than in the last years. I think this is a significant increase. We're not talking about 10%. But one thing was also different with these earthquakes that we're seeing in 2024 compared to the other years. The distribution pattern of these earthquakes is different. Something that wasn't normal the last years. Mostly the earthquakes that we're seeing in 2024, they were actually limited to the Vesuvius area right underneath the crater without spreading out so much to a wider area. So, does that really match that theory that this could be Campi Flegrei? If that would be Campi Flegrei, that would mean Campi Flegrei is triggering these earthquakes right underneath Vesuvius. Or is it magma that's rising up right underneath Vesuvius? That's the big question. Which one is better? Magma rising underneath Vesuvius? Not good. Campi Flegrei trying to trigger Vesuvius? Also not good. Is Campi Flegrei responsible for the magma rising up because it's shaking everything, making the soil more brittle, making ways for magma to rise up? Big question mark. And that's why I said it at the beginning. Do not only look at one parameter like the earthquakes. They need to look at different parameters so that they know what is happening. In Iceland, now we know we're having increased earthquake activity, we have the land rise, and then shortly before the eruptions, they have geothermal power plants. There's more pressure in the boreholes, for example. So there is something happening at Vesuvius with the land rise or subsidence. And that's also a little bit strange. Because if you look at that graph that the INGV has released, all this red line, it's going down. So that means land was subsiding at Vesuvius. But then if you look at roughly around 2024, that trend has stopped. So when we look at the fact that this year, most of the earthquakes were concentrated right in the area of Vesuvius at a depth of less than 3 kilometers, and then the volcanologists of the INGV have also analyzed the other geochemical and physical data so that they could conclude that this year's quakes are also caused by a contraction process in the core area of Vesuvius, and that this long-term trend is continuing. That's what they're saying, contracting that comes with a land rise. So basically what this trend is showing, or what they're saying, is that this comes from that there's shrinkage in the vent of Vesuvius, shrinkage of the vent filling of the conveyor system due to the cooling process inside the volcano, and that this would trigger the earthquakes. So that would mean, nothing to worry about. And this would also mean this causes a slight subsidence in the central volcanic structure. It's inside that crater, it's subsiding. But let's look at this red graph again. That doesn't really confirm that theory right now, because that's the ground uplift data that are coming from all these measuring stations that I have just shown you, that are right on the foot of Vesuvius. And you can see clearly that the trend is broken. There's no longer a subsidence. It's not subsiding anymore. The multi-year trend has definitely been broken. So if it's not subsiding and shrinking anymore, what is causing the earthquakes? So the fact that it's not shrinking anymore, plus these increased earthquake activities, scientists are raising the questions or the concerns that this could come from magma rising up. Magma accumulating at certain depth and magma rising up, accumulating, causing this land rise. A magma chamber that is expanding because it's filling up with magma from a deeper lying magma reservoir. Or the other theory is the ground uplift, the land rise that is happening at Campi Flegrei, reaching up to Vesuvius and rising the land there. So causing these changes in the stress field at Vesuvius, and then also cause these earthquakes. Then another theory is that all the earthquakes, the rumbling, is coming from an increased activity in the hydrothermal system. But you know, it's not known that Vesuvius has such a widespread hydrothermal system or a significant hydrothermal system like Campi Flegrei that could really cause that. So there's another map that the INGV has just released that shows you the earthquakes, and it's also interesting. So what they're showing us here are the locations of the earthquakes that have happened in the last 12 months until October 31st. Remember, it's increasing in November again. So the earthquakes over the last 12 months, we see them in blue. And the larger the circle, the larger the earthquakes. And the most recent ones, not the ones from November, remember that, are the ones that are in red. So even the most recent ones, it's all underneath the crater. It's really centered underneath the crater. So the question I'm raising is, if this is coming from Campi Flegrei, that the land rise at Campi Flegrei is distributing pressure towards Vesuvius, why are not more earthquakes happening in between? I mean, we don't know what's going on underground, how that pressure is distributed. Of course, we've seen it in Iceland. It's not that you have a line of earthquakes from one point to the other, from the Sudnuka crater series to Elde. No, but this is really, really centered. So clusters like this are usually the indication that something is going on with this volcano and not related to any other volcano. And then look at these two graphs. They're interesting as well. These are the hypocentral depth of these earthquakes that they have recorded at Vesuvius over the past 12 months on the left side, and in the month of October on the right side. And what is kind of obvious if you look at this, most of these earthquakes are concentrated at a very shallow depth between 0 and 1 kilometer. Only a few are going deeper. If we look at the last month, it's basically the same pattern. It's at shallow depth. And then the next graphic shows us the magnitude. The left graphic shows us the magnitudes of these earthquakes over the last 12 months. And then we see the magnitude of these earthquakes. For October, we see, it's hard to tell, is there really a trend? But what we see in November, definitely the 2.8, for example. And what you see here, and that is interesting. I mean, that gives us a clearer picture than the graphs we have seen before. That is the cumulative release of seismic activity. Left side at Vesuvius over the past 12 months, and in the past month on the right. And again, consider November. But I mean, look at this, right? It's definitely going up. It's starting to go up. Like, if we look at the overall 1 year graph, this could be April. So this could be the time when the earthquake started really getting bigger at Campi Flegrei. When we had May 20th, we had the 4.4 that was really rattling everyone. The residents of Pozzuoli, that's basically right where the Solfatara, the most active crater of Campi Flegrei, is, were running out on the streets in panic. Their houses were shaking horizontally. It was coming, the shakings were coming with a big loud roar, really, really scaring, as if a missiles coming in and hitting them. So if we look at that, could that be related to the increased activity at Campi Flegrei? It's hard to tell. You might think that when you look at this graph, right? When I only look at the earthquakes that I see that are happening right on top of Vesuvius, I would tend to say, I think the volcano is kind of like doing something independent from Campi Flegrei. But when we look at that, the next table shows you all the earthquakes that have happened in October, and it shows you the magnitudes. Most of them in the smaller magnitudes, some of them in between 0 and 1, and then 8 between 1 and 2, and 1 above 2. And the rest is not determined completely. But then at November, right, we have 2.8. So I think it's an increasing trend. And this is also a very interesting graph, because look at this. This is the frequency of the occurrence of earthquakes at Vesuvius that have been recorded since 1972, and the corresponding cumulative energy. So from this graph here, from this figure, what can we observe? We can observe that the increase in number of recorded events in recent years is primarily associated with low energy seismicity that is confined to the Vesuvius crater area. And that is only detectable at the Vesuvius Observatory headquarters at their station only on certain occasions. So it's really low energy. The red graphs, that's a difference measuring station. That's the BKE station. That's what you see in red. And basically they started recording this since 1999. The blue lines, that is the station that's called OVO. That's the frequency of the earthquakes that they started recording and are still recording since 1972. And then interesting is the black line that you see there. This black line represents the cumulative energy, and that's on the rise. And this is the graph that I just showed you. I show you here again from the last 12 months and from the last month. This is what I think is quite telling, is telling us more than the other graphs. And then look at the next map. It shows you isolated only the GNS permanent measuring stations so that they know what is happening with the land at these stations. So this network of GPS stations monitors the ground deformation at Mount Vesuvius. That is an important key factor to get a broader picture if that volcano is waking up. They provide daily 24/7 basically vertical displacement data at each station. So they're analyzed individually and then put together to a broader picture to see if there are significant changes in the volcano's activity, if the land is rising, for example, or if it's subsiding. So if you start looking at October 2024, we've talked about this a little bit a few minutes ago, the monitoring data that they're getting, they indicate that the vertical displacement that is recorded by these stations have remained within normal ranges. That's what the Vesuvius Observatory is saying. So they're saying right now, no significant anomalies. So that suggests, in their opinion, that during the period from January 23 to the end of October 2024, there have been no notable vertical deformations at Mount Vesuvius that would indicate changes in its activity status. This map here shows you the Vesuvius ground tilt monitoring network and where their stations are located. 3 stations are equipped with surface analog sensors like OVO, CMD, ROV, and 4 of these stations that you see on the map are having borehole digital sensors. They're called IMB, TRC, CMT, CMG, and these are installed at a depth of 25 meters. And then what they're saying, they will install 3 new borehole stations shortly. Okay, and what are these stations measuring and what are the data telling us for the month of October? So we're seeing here the results from one of the borehole measuring stations, the digital stations CMG, from November 2023 to the end of October 2024. So what they're saying is increasing tilt values over time indicate ground inclination changes towards the north of Vesuvius. So these graphs here where you see NS, at NS you see increasing tilt values over time indicate a ground inclination changes towards the north. And then if you look at the EV component, increasing tilt values over time indicate ground inclination changes towards the east. And the other graph shows the representation of the tilt vector over time. And although this looks like something's going on, the Vesuvius Observatory is saying that no significant variations in ground tilt parameters attributable to volcanic sources have been recorded. And now let's have a closer look at the tide gauge monitoring network that is measuring the vertical changes in the water levels. And you see in this map here, we have two stations. One is at Torre del Greco and one is at Castellammare di Stabala. So most interesting for us now is of course the Torre del Greco station that is closest to Vesuvius. And what are the results there? We will look at the tide gauge data that have been recorded at this station, Torre del Greco, and these are indicating that within a time frame from January 2012 until October 2024, that there has been a subsidence of the area of approximately 5.5 centimeters. And you've seen this chart earlier in the video. What is the reference point that they're using? So the data that they're receiving at Torre del Greco, that is basically referenced to the tide gauge station that they have in Naples at the San Vincenzo Pier. So that's how they were able to measure this difference. Right now, it looks like the trend is reversing so that the subsidence has stopped. If you look at the data that we are gathering in 2024 mostly, that's the right end of this chart. And in this chart, it gives us a little bit of a longer time period. There you can see also all these data are recorded from the same station, from the Torre del Greco station. And there you see starting 2006 till where we are now, November, or I think this is October 31st, 2024. So it looks like it has found a bottom, but we have to wait a little longer if it continues to go further down from there, or maybe it continues to rise up. Rising up, that would definitely be an indicator that something is changing and that something is accumulating. And some scientists are already saying they think that the trend is reversed, so that magma is accumulating. We've talked about this a little bit earlier in the video already. So in this time frame, the ground subsidence as a whole in centimeters is 6.3 centimeters. And as I said, they also have a thermal monitoring system in place right at the crater of Vesuvius. And let's have a look at these data. What are they telling us? So this is a permanent network for thermal imaging monitoring, also conducted by the INGV, the Vesuvius Observatory. That thermal monitoring network was installed in 2013. And this system is capturing nighttime thermal images with a resolution of 640 by 480 of the internal southwestern slope of Mount Vesuvius. To be precise, of the crater of Mount Vesuvius. And you see in this picture where the station is, it's called VES. So in this graph, the red dot that you see, that's the location of this thermal imaging monitoring station, and the yellow area, that is the acquired area where they're doing these thermal images. So the processing of these data that they're acquiring from that station, this is generating a time series of maximum temperature values that they're measuring there from these IR images. And they're saying they're removing the seasonality, like if there's rain, if there's snow, whatever might have an impact or might lead to false measuring. They have removed that using the analytical deseasonalization algorithm, STL. This is how it's called. It's called seasonal trend decomposition. And that is implemented in the automated software that they're using there. That might be too technical. Sorry for that, but I find that interesting because this is important, right? We know it when they're measuring the temperatures at the Campi Flegrei fumaroles, and sometimes they have a decrease in temperature, but that might only be because it has been raining. So they have this automated software that they're calling ASIRA, and the long-term trend that they're obtaining here is basically generated by applying second degree, they call this LOESS, fitting to these STL deseasonalized maximum temperatures. So what we're getting out from this creates quite a realistic picture of the real temperatures that are happening at that crater, independent from other influences. A lot of technical talk. Let's look at the real data. Let's look at this graph. This is basically telling us what is going on, and we're looking at November 2020 until basically early November 2024, and this is the chart. What are you reading into that curve? So we're seeing the long-term trend, but we're seeing also the month-to-month trend. They're saying in October 2024, it shows generally stable values, but with noticeable fluctuations. And then they're saying the long-term trend over the past few months indicates stabilization following a slight decrease starting in August. So interesting for me, I would say the red line, that's the trend. That is what is interesting because that seems to be gradually increasing. Temperatures are increasing. That's what I take from it. And we know what it means if temperatures are increasing. Something must be responsible for increasing temperatures on the crater of a volcano, and that is usually magma rising up. And this is another interesting picture because there you see the crater of Vesuvius, and Vesuvius has quite an interesting crater. So you have this crater within the crater. So you see this crater that we're looking at here, where there's the measuring stations SV1, SV2A, SV2B, ASV1, ASV2A, and then you see that looks like a mountain area around it. That's also part of it. I'll show you another picture here that really shows how this top of Mount Vesuvius really looks like. But what we're looking at is definitely that cone here that's within this greater crater. So what are these cameras now? These are mobile thermal cameras that they are able to move around, but they're also doing thermal monitoring at the crater. But they're also using drones that are shooting thermal images. So they're doing all this to potentially find right away changes in ground temperature. at certain points or certain areas that are already showing elevated temperatures. And this is a field with fumaroles, right? So this helps them to identify any modifications that are happening in this distribution area of the fumaroles. It's important to note that they're doing these measurements monthly, and it's called like under non-solar irradiation conditions. So that means basically at night. They're using portable high resolution thermal cameras with high sensitivity. And since January 2021, they also have installed, or they have bought, a new thermal camera that they're using that is offering even a higher resolution. And since May 2022, temperature measurements in some sites are also taken using a drone that is equipped with a high resolution thermal camera. The accuracy of that camera is plus minus 5 degrees Celsius. And they're using this camera whenever the weather permit this. So what you see here, these are the stations where they have the thermal cameras, SV1, SV2A, and then they have rigid thermocouple cameras at a station point, SV2B. And look at this picture here. This is basically showing a fumarole that's located on the western sector of Mount Vesuvius's crater. So there's a visible and thermal images that have been captured at the SV2B station, and they're comparing two measurements against each other. So they have recorded maximum temperature values with a thermal camera and then a thermocouple camera, and they have compared it with the air temperature. They call this TARIA, the air temperature that was basically there at the time of the thermal survey. And what you see, this is covering a time period from January 2022 to the end of October 2024. So in picture A, you see where that measuring instrument is located. Picture B, you see the actual thermal image. That is just the latest image that they have, end of October 2024. And you can see how high it is, what the temperature is. The more yellow it is, the higher the temperature. And then you can see the actual temperatures of the SV2B station here in graphs. And then the bottom line, that light green line, the TARIA, that is basically the temperatures that have been happening there that have nothing to do with the volcanoes. That is just, they're comparing this. So can we see some changes or significant increases here at these fumaroles? I don't think that there is anything significant that we see here that it has heated up. It's basically pretty consistent at a little bit above or below 70 degrees Celsius, a little bit like 75 degrees Celsius. And here we see a large picture of that crater again, because they have conducted other tests there as well, geochemical tests of the liquids. That is also a very, very interesting method. So they have carried out these monitoring activities in October 2024, and that has included a continuous data acquisition of the CO2 flux coming from the soil there at this crater. Then, of course, very important, the temperature of the main fumarole that is present in this crater, and then the soil temperature gradient, where they have used the multi-parametric station that is called FLXOV6 that is installed in the crater rim area in the southwestern sector. Then what you see there, they have taken samples of the fumaroles B1 and B3 that are located on the crater rim. You see it here in that picture. And then the measurements of the CO2 flux from the soil and soil temperature at selected fixed points in the crater rim area. So we'll have another look at that picture, and so that we know where are the main fumaroles in this crater. They're called B1 and B3. They're on the crater rim, but then there also are fumaroles on the crater floor. So they are called FC2 and FC5. And then you see these white symbols. That are the fixed points that measure the CO2 flux from the soil and the soil temperature in the crater rim area. So they did sample just this October the fumaroles on the crater rim, B1 and B3, and they were also analyzed. And basically the results of these measurements, this is what we can see in this graph here. Basically from these fumaroles, their chemical composition that consists primarily of a mixture of air and a deep hydrothermal component did not show significant variations if you compare it to previous periods. That is basically what their takeaway from this chart is. And then let's have a look at the multiparametric station that is installed on the crater rim, that is FLXOV6 in the southwest sector, that measures the CO2 flux from the soil every 2 hours, the soil temperature gradient, the temperature of the main fumarolic emission in this area, and the atmospheric pressure and air temperature every 10 minutes. And you can see these charts here that represent these measurements. What they're saying is that the parameters that they have measured during the monitoring period in October did not show significant variations. The slight changes that are observed are related, that's what they're saying, to seasonal variations and specific meteorological events like rain, strong winds, low pressure, atmospheric temperature, etc. So they were not able to take these parameters away in these measurements that they have taken there. The problem that they had is that during this reference period in October, one of the 3 temperature sensors that they used to measure the soil temperature gradient has malfunctioned. So yeah, that happens, right? So they are saying they will replace that system shortly with a new one so that they really can get accurate data. And more problems. The station FLOXV7 that is located on the crater floor of Vesuvius was heavily damaged by a landslide and other meteorological events that they're saying. So they also have to replace this one, and they will do so, they say, with a new type of station. The new station is now available, and they say the restoration operations on the crater floor side are ongoing at the moment. So they're dealing with the landslide or what it has caused, or trying to put that back up. So they're saying that over time, this new type of station will basically gradually replace the existing stations in this geochemical network. So for right now, I guess, again, we have to wait for these new stations to send us better data so that we get a broader picture. So the conclusions that the INGV is taking away from these October samples and measurings at all the stations that we went through. So they say the state of the volcano in October 2024. I think November might be a different ball game. So what is it? The seismology, the earthquakes. Vesuvius, that's what they're saying, continues to exhibit background seismicity with 186 earthquakes that are recorded with maximum magnitudes 2.1, error plus minus 0.3. And 136 of these earthquakes were localized right underneath Vesuvius, the crater. And they say these events predominantly occurred all in the crater area with depth concentrated within the first kilometer, so shallow. Deformations, number 2, their conclusions. GNS, tilt metric, and tide gauge data do not indicate any variations that would be attributable to volcanic sources. What about the thermography? They say data from the permanent thermal camera show stabilization of the maximum surface temperature values following the slight decrease that they have observed in the previous month. They say measurements from the mobile thermal camera also indicate a generally stationary trend in maximum temperatures. What about the geochemistry? They say no significant variations were observed in the geochemical parameters that they have acquired. Monitoring data continue to indicate a multi-year trend of declining hydrothermal activity within the crater of Vesuvius. And their conclusions are based on the current state of volcanic activity that they have outlined in this bulletin. No elements suggest significant short-term developments. And this is something that we have to understand. No significant short-term developments, but we have seen some trends. We have seen some trend lines increasing. So they're saying, well, Vesuvius is not going to explode anytime soon, most likely. But they're also sending us a note at the end of this bulletin. They say any changes in monitored parameters that could indicate different evolutions of the phenomena that they have described will be subject to further investigation and will be promptly communicated. So the interesting bulletin, in my opinion, will be also the one that's coming out next month, so early December probably. That will cover November. So guys, let me know, what do you think? Campi Flegrei and Vesuvius, are they two buddies that are planning something very bad for the over 6 million people in that area, for Italy, and maybe for greater areas in the world? Or are they both cooking their own soup? I don't know. Both variations are not really great. I think best case scenario would be if the Campi Flegrei ground uplift is just causing a little bit of some earthquakes at Vesuvius without anything going on underneath Vesuvius. My personal opinion is there's so many earthquakes at Vesuvius and it's increasing. I think something's definitely also going on at Vesuvius. Could that have been triggered initially by Campi Flegrei? Some graphs indicate that. But, you know, I guess, as always, we have to wait and see. So thank you so much for watching and supporting this channel, guys. You are really, really awesome. If you want to learn more about Campi Flegrei, subscribe, check out my channel. I have playlists for all these volcanoes. I have certain videos that give you more information about what Vesuvius can do or did in the past, or whether they're connected or not, and about other volcanic areas in Ethiopia, Fentale. Lots of stuff is going on. Of course, in Iceland, we're waiting for the next eruption. That could be most likely starting mid-November, and then within the next weeks, something could happen there. So thanks for watching. If you want to support the channel more, become a channel member for more behind the scenes with me and my animals, my farm, and what is going on. Link is underneath this video, the join button, or the link is in the description of this video. If you want to support the channel on my Buy Me a Coffee website, would be awesome, guys. I'm kind of living off coffee. That keeps me going for all this. And be safe, be prepared wherever you are, guys. And yeah, thanks so much to my members for all your nice comments regarding Apollo. It's really appreciated. I'm having a little bit of a hard time because of that, and I'll keep you updated with another video probably tomorrow, because there's more appointments tomorrow. So thank you so much, guys. I see you very soon. Bye bye.